Have you ever been watching the news and heard about a drug conviction getting overturned, maybe on what sounds like a technicality?
It happens, yeah.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Even when there's evidence, what happens if, the procedures law enforcement followed weren't quite by the book?
Exactly. Those procedures are there for a reason.
So today we're doing a deep dive into a Supreme Court case that actually went viral, partly because of this. It's People of the Philippines versus John Custodio y Argote, also known as Bolongkoy.
A really significant case.
We're going to unpack how this case moved through the courts and figure out the critical reason why the Supreme Court eventually reversed that guilty verdict.
Right. We're looking at GR No. 2510UN4. The final decision came down June 14, 2023. And fundamentally, this case involved two main charges against Mr. Custodio.
Okay, what were they?
First, the illegal sale of a really tiny amount, 0.04 grams of methamphetamine hydrochloride, shabu as it's commonly known.
0.04 grams. Very small.
Very. And second, illegal possession of a larger amount, 3.07 grams of shabu.
And these both supposedly happened on the same day.
Yes, both alleged offenses were dated October 19, 2015 in Dumaguete City.
Okay, so pretty serious charges, despite the small amount in the first one. What did the first court, the trial court, decide?
Well, the regional trial court, that was Branch 30 in Dumaguete, they handed down their verdict on July 17, 2017. They found Mr. Custodio guilty, beyond reasonable doubt, on both counts.
Wow, okay.
The RTC basically said, look, the prosecution proved guilt to a moral certainty. They felt the evidence was properly preserved, the chain of custody was observed, and the drugs themselves, the corpus delicti, were positively ID'd.
So, pretty strong conviction then. What was the sentence?
It was heavy. For the illegal sale, life imprisonment and a fine of P500,000.
Life.
And for the illegal possession, an indeterminate sentence, 12 years and a day up to 14 years, plus another fine, P400,000.
That's a very definitive ruling from the RTC. So, naturally, it went up on appeal.
It did. It went to the Court of Appeals. And the CA, they affirmed the RTC's decision. That was on August 29th, 2019.
So the Court of Appeals agreed completely.
Pretty much. They tackled a key point the defense raised about the absence of what are called insulating witnesses during the inventory.
Right, the witnesses. For people listening, who are those again?
Typically, it should be someone from the barangay, like a local official, a media representative, and someone from the Department of Justice, or an elected public official.
Okay.
The CA said, well, yeah, maybe they weren't there right when the inventory form was being filled out, but that doesn't automatically mean the evidence is no good.
Okay. What was their reasoning?
They also felt it wasn't unreasonable to do the inventory back at the police station, for security reasons.
Security, okay.
And they stressed that the arresting officer had marked the items initially, which, in their view, helped protect the evidence's value.
So 2 courts down, both saying guilty. It sounds like, from the prosecution side, a pretty solid case.
It certainly seemed that way.
So what happened when it got to the highest court, the Supreme Court?
Well, initially, the Supreme Court's First Division, in a resolution from November 11, 2021, they actually agreed with the lower courts, too.
They did. So they also affirmed the conviction.
At first, yes. They found all the elements of the crimes were there, and they felt the chain of custody was sufficiently established.
Okay, but we know that's not the end of the story, right? There was a twist.
Exactly. Mr. Custodio filed a motion for reconsideration.
Ah, the Emmer. What was his argument this time around? Was it different?
He filed it on June 17, 2022. He again questioned the buy-bust operation itself, but crucially, he really hammered on that chain of custody issue, specifically the break right at the very start.
The beginning, what exactly?
He argued that not having those required witnesses, the barangay official, media rep, DOJ rep, right there at the moment and place of his arrest, that was a fatal procedural flaw.
Not just during the form filling, but at the actual arrest site.
Precisely. His point was, look, having them show up later at the police station to sign off on the inventory, that doesn't fix the fact that they weren't there when the seizure actually happened. The initial step was missed.
And this argument resonated differently with the Supreme Court.
It absolutely did. This is where things turned. In that June 14, 2023 resolution, the Supreme Court granted the motion for reconsideration.
Granted it. So
They reversed their own previous resolution, and John Custodio was acquitted.
acquitted. Wow. After the RTC, the CA, and even the SC's initial look all said guilty, what was the absolute key? What changed their minds so definitively?
The absolute game changer was a legal principle that had been really solidified in another relatively recent Supreme Court case. It's called People v. Casa.
CASA, okay. What does that case establish?
Casa, decided August 16th, 2022, laid it out very clearly. When you have a warrantless seizure, like in a buy bust, the general rule, the default, is that the inventory and the photographing of whatever was seized must happen right there, at the place of seizure.
Right there on the spot. No exceptions.
Well, there are exceptions, but they're specific and limited. You can move the inventory, say, to the nearest police station or the apprehending team's office.
Okay.
If, and it's a big if, it's genuinely not practical to do it at the scene, maybe for safety or security reasons, or if the items themselves are in immediate danger there.
That sounds reasonable.
But, and this is the crucial part the CASA ruling emphasized, if the police do move it, they absolutely must provide valid, sensible, consistent reasons for why they did it. And those reasons need to be documented in their affidavits, not just claimed later as an afterthought.
So you can't just say security concerns vaguely, you need to explain why.
Exactly. You need a justifiable reason, properly explained.
And in Mr. Custodio's case, did the prosecution provide that kind of justification?
That was the problem. In this case, the prosecution completely failed to offer any sufficient, justifiable reason for doing the inventory back at the Pievzog office instead of at the arrest site in Barangay Catawinin.
They just didn't explain it properly.
Correct. And the Supreme Court saw this failure as, well, a critical breach. It broke the very first and arguably most important link in that chain of custody.
Yeah, that makes sense. If you don't handle it correctly right from the second it's seized.
The integrity is immediately questionable, isn't it? The court actually cited another case, People v. Ismail, which basically says a major break early on can't be fixed by doing things right later.
You can't unbreak the chain once it's broken at the start?
Precisely. Once that initial integrity is compromised, the doubt just lingers. So because of that procedural failure right at the beginning, the court said they couldn't be sure about the reliability, the evidentiary value of the seized shabu, and that cast serious doubt on the corpus delicti.
The body of the crime, the drug itself, even if it was shabu, the way it was handled created too much doubt.
Exactly. You have to prove that specific drug seized from the accused was the same drug presented in court, handled properly all the way through. The procedural lapse created doubt about that critical link.
It really highlights how important these procedures are, even if they seem technical.
Absolutely. The court referenced People v. Año too, which reinforces that the court must overturn convictions if the chain of custody isn't followed and there's no good reason given.
They didn't stop there, did they? I remember reading about another point they made.
Right. They also quoted from People v. McCood, making a powerful statement. They emphasized that, yes, fighting dangerous drugs is vital, but it cannot justify violating fundamental constitutional rights.
Especially for those who might be vulnerable.
Exactly. Vulnerable to potential abuse by state agents. The court stressed the need to be extra vigilant in drug cases, precisely to avoid punishing innocent people. They even cited a more recent case, People v. Rangag, on that point.
It's a strong message about balancing law enforcement with protecting rights. So what was the final order then regarding Mr. Custodio?
The Supreme Court ordered his immediate release from detention.
Immediate release.
Yes, unless, of course, he was being held for some other lawful reason. And they told the Bureau of Corrections to report back within 5 days on the action they'd taken.
Wow. What a journey through the legal system. This case really brings some key legal ideas into sharp focus. Maybe we can quickly recap those for everyone listening.
Sure. 3 big ones stand out here. First, chain of custody. We've talked about it a lot. It's that crucial, legally required sequence for handling seized drugs.
From seizure to court, unbroken.
Right. To ensure the evidence you see in court is the exact same evidence seized, untampered with. Its integrity and identity are key.
Okay, second.
Corpus delicti. Literally, the body of the crime. In drug cases, this means the dangerous drug itself. The prosecution has to prove, with moral certainty, that the illegal drug existed and was the subject of the offense.
And if the chain of custody is broken, that proof becomes doubtful.
Exactly. And third, that warrantless seizure and inventory rule, heavily emphasized by the CASA ruling. Generally, inventory and photos happen at the scene, unless there's a specific, justifiable, and properly documented reason to move it, based on practicability or safety.
Got it. Chain of custody, corpus delicti, and the inventory rule.
Those are the core principles highlighted here.
This is such an insightful case. It really makes you think, doesn't it? What does this ruling tell us ultimately about that balance we need to strike between fighting crime effectively and really upholding due process for individuals?
It's a constant balancing act, isn't it?
How absolutely critical is it for law enforcement to stick to these procedural rules, even the ones that might seem small, to make sure justice is fair for everyone involved?
Well, this case screams that it's incredibly critical. It shows that due process isn't just, red tape. It's fundamental.
Yeah.
Sticking to these rules protects the integrity of the whole justice system, protects evidence, and importantly, protects people from potential errors or even abuse. It really reinforces that the ends fighting crime don't justify compromising the legal means.
A really powerful takeaway. So what do you think about all this? We'd genuinely love to hear your perspective on this deep dive. Let us know down in the comments section.
Yeah, share your thoughts.
And hey, if you found this breakdown valuable, if it helped you understand the nuances, please do hit that favorite button. It really helps us out.
And look, if you're keen on getting clearer insights into Philippine law, understanding these landmark Supreme Court decisions that really shape things,
Yeah.
then definitely subscribe now. We'll have more in-depth explorations like this coming your way.